What we believe becomes our reality, but to believe one ideally needs a good foundation, knowledge, and conviction. Conviction needs to be based on the understanding of facts. Understanding depends on our wisdom. Wisdom is the comprehension of the difference between right and wrong, good and bad, positive and negative. This is the story of our lives. Ever since my childhood, particularly after being ardently encouraged to read the Bible to know the truth by my friends who adhered to Jehovah's Witnesses, I did so as if reading fantasy books, and in the process felt confused and bored. The more I read the Holy Book, the more I was convinced that they were not telling me the whole truth. Obviously, they were not informed. As time went by, and I started to live in Germany and later in Australia, I questioned my friends belonging to this organization to clarify matters, but they could not. Instead, to cover their lack, they advised me not to question the Spirit. What I am referring to and quoting here should not be taken as if I am preaching, for I prefer to intensely analyze the subject matter under consideration. My questions remain fundamental because what was purported to be true does not sound right. In all their publications, the witnesses try to teach their members and others these so-called fundamentals, therefore obliging me to become more critical about their wisdom. One of my queries was about their claims in regard to Jesus and Jehovah, and so I drew their attention to the Bible text Revelations chapter 1, 8, 17, 18, where it is written, "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, Fear not, I am he, first and the last. I am he that liveth, and was dead. And behold, I am alive for evermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and of death." Although the witnesses claim otherwise, these texts indicate that there exists one individual Lord, and not two separate people in the divine position. What about the claims of the witnesses in regard to the connection of the Holy Spirit and Jehovah? Are they also separate entities? 2 Corinthians chapter 3:17 speaks of these words, "Now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." To me it appears that the Lord and Spirit are the same divinity. This way Jesus and the Spirit cannot be separate beings, as the witnesses eagerly claim. Jehovah's Witnesses state that 144,000 will inherit the heavenly kingdom in rulership, and are therefore entitled to partake in the symbolic sacrifice of Christ's body and blood, and when they celebrate the memorial, as they call it, they pass wine and unleavened bread from one person to another without consuming any of the offerings we discover within Christian churches. According to the Bible, we understand that everybody is encouraged to partake in Christ's sacrificial offering, for it is not reserved to only 144,000 faithful ones, as the witnesses claim. We read in John chapter 3, verses 3 and 5, "Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Jesus answered, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God." 1 John chapter 5, verse 1 reads, "Whosoever believeth that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and every one that loveth that begot loveth him also that is begotten of him." Further verse 3 declares, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous." I dared not ask these questions of any Jehovah's Witness, but if you can see what these texts are pointing at, you can also understand why they are very apprehensive when there is need to clarify their claims. It always surprises me why the witnesses avoid answering such fundamental questions, yet are eager to declare that they know everything to be known under holy inspiration. But sooner or later they will have to admit that they are not inspired of God, and certainly not guided by him. Revelations 14:10-11 reveals that all followers of Christ are encouraged to understand what the connection between eternal torment and God is. "The same shall drink of wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up for ever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name." One wonders, considering the deeds of Jehovah's Witnesses everywhere, if this portrays them or those they oppose. I would like to ask those claiming to know everything, how do they know that they know everything? Magda and her beloved brothers always maintained the notion of being inspired by the Holy Spirit, therefore knowing all that needs to be known. Do they really know the true nature of that Holy Spirit? I say it is their self-styled assumption. Let us therefore ask ourselves, are our assumptions always correct? We may all be led to false conclusions, and therefore I believe it is better to fine-tune our assumptions from time to time until they are based on provable facts. Many of us seem to follow rules based upon our lifelong experiences while we judge others incessantly. Do we really learn anything from them? Do we really know why we experience them? Why, for example, do we fall in love? Let us explore a little further and ask some important questions. Is there anybody in the civilized world who does not want happiness? Here I am joining in the choir where other thinkers ask the same. Remember, many of us equate happiness with buying power, and some call it materialism. However, people like Jehovah's Witnesses, including my sweet ex-wife, have different opinions. Here is a good question. Who does not want to make a good impression on other people without being selfish? The witnesses have an answer for this. The only impression they need to make on those answering their door is for them to become convinced about the supposed truth presented without any deeper understanding. Many of us agree that when we are happy and smile often, we create a positive impression on others. In fact, the witnesses make use of their children when going house to house, because they know what a beautiful impression they can create on others with their heartwarming smiles. Furthermore, after any kind of work, we all want to be rewarded. When there is no reward, we cannot satisfy our needs, let alone make great waves in our lives, nor can we assist others in need. Here is a reality statement which the witnesses bitterly oppose. Whatever objectives we set, whether it is to get married, acquire a university degree, or create a successful business, they will always have a positive effect on our ambitions and happiness in the long run. Smile, and you will be responded with the same. Do something worthwhile, and you will be rewarded. This is the rule of thumb. Although it may be a cliché to consider the question of future generations We need to realize that no matter how we, parents, struggle to bring up our children, it need not necessarily have any long-term effect on them, because in the end, they all develop their own personal trends, as we all did. But they may be severely hindered by certain cults, which choose to keep their adherers in bondage. We can only teach them our principles, but cannot live their lives for them. We certainly can never live our lives through them, but some parents force their way to do just that. I have seen it happen over many years. Magda often spoke about her unwavering principles, but I am yet to know what they were. Was she really au fait with them? Has she been told that sometimes we change our personal styles, which are subject to the social environment we are in? It may feel like following the traditions of others and learning the language of the locals, as I did when traveling and associating with multicultural folk. It is like blending in, as I once had to do when going with my wife to the services of her dear brothers in their kingdom halls. Observably, this is what Magda was doing when she became a subservient member of the witness organization without question, but absolute devotion and dedication. My following words are not based on the biased viewpoints of others, but they need to be considered nevertheless. We all know that religion has a negative influence on people, with their preconceived notions throughout the centuries, creating prejudices against other belief systems. Consider, for instance, atheists and Jehovah's Witnesses. Think also of those resolute views we have been brought up with, such as good morals, family unity, independence, socialism, and theology. If you notice, they change all the time, as they have to, and sooner or later we are bound to learn the real values behind those so-called ultimate concepts and realities. As I mentioned before, these are not only my ideas, but are also considered by great thinkers. Are we all doing fine and dressed for the occasion? Just think about it. Did we really freely select to live in a certain place, have an exciting career, or was it a good thing that we got married? Remember, we always want to be right, but are we? Some people think so, and I have met a number of them. Maybe they are the chosen of God. I have heard many people asking, what do you think is wrong with all these foreigners living amongst us? Why are many of them not accepted? What do you think about the issues concerning the natives of this country? There are continued conflicts between them and us, which have been there throughout the ages. How can we realize otherwise that we have a self-identity? Do we need such conflicts in order to form a self-identity? All these viewpoints usually remain very judgmental and biased. This one is superior to that, and we are always better than the other. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, are always right and perfect, whereas the rest of the world is evil. There are many examples one can consider here. Blacks and whites, this or that other religion, female and male relationships, the evildoers who do not recognize God's allegedly chosen organization on earth, and those who are the so-called righteous ones. On the other hand, do we really need anyone's approval or permission to be happy? Do we need any organization to tell us how to live? If we are not happy, is it because we are not confident enough in ourselves? It is certainly easier to advise others to be confident and positive. Jehovah's Witnesses do it all the time during their weekly gatherings. We all have the ability to turn things around, for we can think, and the way we do this makes all the difference. We know that people have been helped by positive thinking, and there is no doubt about it, for I have experienced it for myself. But whether we are happy or unhappy may not always be noticed by others. Our biological design is one of the issues we must reflect on. We are told that when we are more knowledgeable of the circumstances within the social environment, we may automatically become happier without any conscious input. However, realistically speaking, what can we do about it? When you consider, like great thinkers and philosophers of our times do, change is not easy. I have experienced it often, needing to make changes to my position in life to survive the tempests of existence. Such changes can only occur on a personal level, and we seem to experience it all the time. Possibly, changing our social structure might be a good start. How? This may be a little too courageous to consider. Ponder the news you hear from every corner of the globe. No doubt we are witnessing something extraordinary. The breakdown of society, unemployment, and economic rationale. Objectivity and neutrality is also being replaced with mediocre models. I can do naught else but agree with those who ask, are we witnessing the downfall of life as we know it? Certain businesses are fast disappearing, such as the automotive industries in some countries like Australia, and unemployment issues are resurfacing. The following is not based upon my observation alone. We are often told that people who want to work or do something worthwhile must never be hindered, and those others who do not wish to do so should not be forced into unsuitable jobs. Good point. Can you imagine a time when there is no longer any need for joblessness, while everybody is doing what they really wish to do? It sounds extremely idealistic, does it not? But the Watchtower cult claims to have an answer for that too. There are a number of good books around you should seek out. They are written by excellent authors who do not just imagine, but creatively think in light of their personal experiences. This is what Jehovah's Witnesses also imagine to promote as the world will supposedly be after Armageddon. But would this scenario, as mentioned, create extreme lethargy in a world where no one wants to do anything? This had been also considered by Michael Kuragerus and Roman Scheppeler in their Die Welt erklärt in 3 Strichen a few years ago. Would it generate more separatism and disunity? We already have more of the same, and many are rightfully concerned. Should we perhaps direct these questions to budding futurists? I feel that the witnesses would not want to think about it anyway, for the answers, as they would most certainly claim, can only be found within the pages of God's alleged words of truth, i.e., the Bible. By saying this, I am not putting the Holy Book in a dustbin, but one could probably do so with the Witnesses' New World Translation, for it is twisted to suit their purpose. Their assumptions are only based on their falsified translation of the Holy Book, which they promote as the truth. It never ceases to amaze me how some people adamantly claim that they always tell the truth. In fact, my children were so conditioned to believe that their mother could only speak the truth. I know I am repeating myself, but both my daughters, often following their mother, argued over their personal truthfulness, even when they told many stories which were untrue. Since they always had to be right, I had no choice but play the game, in a psychological sense, so very carefully not to hurt them. I believed and hoped that one could make them aware of their lack as children, while teaching them about honesty being the best policy. But it was not possible to teach anything to those who were completely blinded by the indoctrination and baseless concepts of the real wicked, declaring themselves as the witnesses. What are they really witnesses of? It still amazes me, when I met Birgit years later, how she proudly stated that her mother would never tell lies, for she was in the truth and a faithful servant of Jehovah. Does one need to be a Jehovah's servant to tell the truth? Since Magda had the tendency to accept lies as her truth, could it perhaps be that she was in reality the servant of the devil, disguised as Jehovah? In addition, Birgit exclaimed that somebody had to be telling lies, implying that it had to be me, for I was portrayed as being faithless and certainly not in the truth. But when Magda took the children to Perth, what was she teaching them about their father when they questioned her? The reality became clearer, especially when she changed her and the children's names without my knowledge and consent. According to information, as mentioned elsewhere, I was pronounced dead. I still cannot understand why some government officials suspected I had faked my death. I had no idea why I would have done so. It truly was beyond me. Somebody was certainly telling lies. I was apparently considered as good as dead in the eyes of their God, Jehovah, after being disfellowshipped as Magda and the witnesses loosely spoke of. They considered untruths as real regarding my origin, as being from a Middle Eastern country, therefore claiming I could only be expected to present similar attitudes to those who deny freedom to their women, treating them very harshly. I was even portrayed as if I was a violent Turk. In truth, it could only be Magda and her faithful friends' belief, not the reality. Besides, they always claim when people are not in their truth, all kinds of nasty things could be expected of them. In all honesty, I am not obliged to talk about this, and am not from a fanatical background. It was a great shame if my ex-wife did not realize it, yet I have been painted as such by those witnesses and also by Magda. How could she have been only telling the truth? Why was there an inquiry about me faking my own death? Why such a falsehood? Was she perhaps thinking of punishing me under righteous inspiration once again? Was she perhaps advised by allegedly faithful servants of their God to declare me dead? How could they be inspired of God? Her daughter wanted to accuse me with the gravest and unacceptable act, contrary to my nature, after asking me if I knew how she could have me put behind bars, and then paying money to her boyfriends, asking them to bash me up, spilling my brains out. It was probably connected to their belief that mother always tells the truth. It could have been yet another lie invented by her other daughter, Birgit. After all my unwanted experiences, I believe that Annette suffered from a psychological disorder, which her mother was completely unaware of and would not even want to know it, and her childhood, when not living with me, did not help her. She had the tendency to exaggerate things and events at every opportunity and was extremely good in seeing things which never existed. Maybe she was highly imaginative. When she did not like something or somebody, she explained things in the severest possible way. When she was a young teen, Annette was the most unforgiving character. I know that her characteristics were most certainly inherited from Magda, for it was never my nature. She was also easily convinced about all kinds of things, while imitating her close peers, especially her boyfriend's beliefs, and whatever they enjoyed. sex and drugs seemed to cloud their minds. Repeating myself, I need to say that if any of her friends suffered some form of ill or any mistreatment, she would immediately claim that she also had the same experience. Why did she enter into my bedroom naked, and what indeed made her do it? Did she need the ammunition to make her claim appear real? Is that why she named me with her unexpected and ungainly expletives when I demanded she leave the room immediately? She could not be any different than her close friends, probably fearing she might not be accepted or loved by those she adored. Whenever I attempted to talk about it to her mother with the aim of finding ways to help Annette, Magda either conveniently ignored it or did not want to know. When Birgit and her brother asked their mother about their father's whereabouts, all they got from her was just, "He left us." Furthermore, they were constantly subjected to this advice. People disobeying Jehovah's rules and principles will be punished in the hellfire and will not have everlasting life. Now the children understood that their father was really a bad guy, not obeying those divine rules, and was also to be destroyed unless he came back to the truth. But luckily, he was not in that truth in the first place. So far, not one single Jehovah's Witness has been able to explain what the real truth is. This truth is presented as the uniqueness which liberates people, but the witnesses are never liberated from the fanaticism they adhere to. Years later, when I met Birgit for the first time, she told me how sad she felt about Claude, who was often very depressed, holding his head between his hands, crying and asking, "Why did Dad leave us? Why?" This conversation proved that my suspicions were correct. I was painted as a tyrant whom God was going to punish for being unfaithful. Everybody who was not in the truth could only tell lies, and everybody faithful to Jehovah, just like their mother, who told only the truth, was going to be rewarded. It was very painful to hear something like, "You know, Dad, Mom can only tell the truth. Somebody is telling lies." Who could that somebody be? Many years later, I was still hearing things about myself as if I had nothing better to do other than tell lies about my own background. I was told that Birgit esteemed me highly on one side as an intelligent person, and yet at the same time was saying things like, "You can't really trust that Dad is telling the truth." As far as she was concerned, her father could only be a dishonest charlatan. Who indeed was dishonest? If there was a great God who created the heavens and earth so magnificently, would such a great being destroy his wonderful creation, which he allegedly fashioned in his own likeness? What good parent would destroy their child forever for breaking a crystal vase? Is there any real truth to be found? However, the real truth is very objective, and provable objectivity is the ideal. Some scientific critics maintain an alternative way of thinking by questioning the validity of truth itself. There have been many who described it as it really is. But what is as it really is? Is it an imagined concept? Let us be frank, because the whole concept sounds more and more biased. Let us analyze this in depth a little more. In ancient times, man was the provider and protector of his family, and this was accepted as the norm. More theories have marched through the decades, supposedly justifying the differences people present as objectively correct. Even medicine studied the differences between genders, but not their similarities for a long time, until the scientific world experienced a great revolution without the interference of the Church. Remember, Questioning objective study does not ask anything about the differences between right and wrong. Therefore, those questions become meaningless, but the observed realities never change. However, illusions do. When we discover people who claim to speak only the truth, we should consider the importance of asking them about what they believe and promote as being the truth, and under what conditions it was created. When Jehovah's Witnesses quote from the Bible, "Truth will set you free," perhaps they should also ask, which one? It is therefore far better to stop everything you have been told to believe. There will always be someone else thinking completely the opposite. It is far better to be a little more adventurous, more curious about the behavior and attitudes you are surrounded with, while open-mindedly observing your own. Are we really free when we decide to do things? When we look at situations from political to financial viewpoints and events around the world today, something very strange comes to light. Do you notice how people follow each other's trends in finances, fashion, and the arts? One can classify it as herd mentality, but in reality it is a collective behavior pattern. Group thinking and the various opinions of others can quickly become intense. Especially if they think and behave in a similar way, people's actions can easily become radical and fanatical. We have seen many examples of this mentality throughout history, as we still do. Consider the religious extremism and intolerance observed through recent decades all around the world. Think about the Nazi rulership of the 1940s. Are Jehovah's Witnesses any different? If you are familiar with this African proverb, you can easily see the simplistic analysis of the situation at hand. He who is carried on a mother's back does not appreciate how far the town is. One needs to be able to research and analyze the events and things in one's world open-mindedly. If everyone did things the way you do, you would believe you are following the right path. But is it so? The world is undeniably changing, and we have witnessed many intervention methods being utilized in an effort to end conflicts in the human world. But have they actually been stopped? If not, why not? Greed still dominates the policies of the world governments. In ideal circumstances, perhaps prevention of conflicts can be classified as mankind's readiness towards a better future. Have you ever thought that you may be contributing to the development of an event, knowingly or unknowingly, fueling with assumptions based upon idle gossip, fears, and desires? Perhaps somebody even told you what to believe, for they had read it somewhere. Some doomsday preachers do so on a daily basis, and some even come to your door to convince you about the validity of their claims. I have known people who committed suicide to avoid participation in predicted worldwide disasters and conflicts. Consider how some so religiously follow the weather reports or read their stars. Similarly, my ex-wife followed the dictates of her faithful brothers in everything she did. I was happy to have closed one chapter of my adventure of life and started a new one without ignoring my earthly past. I decided never again to be burdened with could have been or if I could haves. If we desire our journey to be really pleasant, we should aim not to load ourselves with heavy luggage, but rather travel light. In other words, no matter how bitter or sweet the past might have been, it was better for me leave all the bitterness and resentfulness behind, as written in a book of memories. With this in mind, I traveled to London in the 1980s. Whether it was to be for just a few months or years, I was going to accept the challenge. I was certain that my supposed children and ex-wife would be glad to know I was gone through the divine intervention of their God, as they hoped and prayed for. It would give them the satisfaction of me being completely removed and nowhere to be found. And the ultimate desire of all Jehovah's Witnesses for those who were disfellowshipped had to be a great goal. If you had associated with such a fanatical group of people adhering to herd mentality and were excommunicated for grave sins you might have committed, when visiting their kingdom halls you would never be greeted and your existence never recognized. It is as if you were never born. There exists an extreme fear amongst their members in case they may sin against the Spirit if they associated with or spoke to the disfellowshipped, for it is always considered an unforgivable sin. In reality, if Jehovah's Witnesses are questioned about this aspect, you can rest assured that you will be lied to and the facts denied. I am stating the absolute facts. Under the supposed divine guidance of a graciously forgiving and loving God, you would be removed from their midst, never to be associated with them, unless you humbly sought Jehovah's forgiveness, committing yourself to studying the so-called Bible truths for a considerable time. You would be regarded as an outsider. However, apparently the witnesses never judge anybody, as they follow the Bible principles which they claim to understand. Do they understand what Psalm chapter 75:7 indicates? But God is the judge. I will also tell you this. Under pressure from the shunned folk all around the world, I will not be surprised if the witnesses change their tone and start encouraging their members to speak to the rejected in order to appear humble and righteous in the eyes of the world. Remember, they have spread around the world like a cancer due to their diligence. After my own experiences, could anyone ever consider that I would be so naive as to partake in their falsehood? They did exactly what they are good at: destruction of lives. Since the witnesses, including my beloved ex-wife, are unable to understand shunned folk, maybe the Bible, which they seemingly trust, can explain what they have inflicted many others, like me, with. Psalm chapter 31:12 and 13 describes how I felt. I am forgotten as a dead man, out of mind. I am like a broken vessel, for I have heard the slander of many. Fear was on every side, while they took counsel together against me. They devised to take away my life. While in London and elsewhere, when encountering witnesses, I remained friendly with them, and they were happy to talk to me. That is, until I made mention of being disfellowshipped. As was oft demonstrated, even if they were having a cup of tea, they immediately put it down, getting up without uttering a single word, and marching out as quickly as they could. They all believe that associating with a godless sinner is an unforgivable sin. This is the very belief system of high fanaticism, which forces them to do everything possible to break families apart from their allegedly unfaithful husbands or wives. This became the subject of a harmless joke amongst some of my colleagues and friends over the years. During my stay in South Kensington, London, I was once again a free man, nobody asking me how my family was, and I felt very happy about it, for I was shunned and completely eradicated from their lives. I wanted to get to know London a little better and discover the city from north to south and east to west almost on a daily basis. In many ways it presented similarities to other European capital cities, but there was something else not comparable with them. To start with, the people of London became friendlier once they discovered more about you, but you needed to be patient. There were also many older Londoners who looked as if you came from another planet, until they found out how much you loved the city and appreciated their traditional values. There were those who thought it to be very difficult to converse with a foreigner until you spoke to them in their language. There were some who attempted to talk to me in a language only Tarzan could speak, until I asked them if they spoke English. When ordering a pint of beer in one of the pubs somewhere in the East End, I encountered a few roughnecks jokingly talking words of abuse about my ethnicity. Standing in front of them, I raised my glass as if nothing had stirred me, and made a few jokes. It was pleasurable to see them stunned and speechless. Asking them about their wellness and the concerns of British soccer clubs, my aim was fulfilled. They became friendly, and one even decided to buy me the next pint. Another told me, "How come you are just like us, yet you speak like the Froggies?" That was a name the English gave to the French. However, wherever I have been, I always endeavored to make friends, and the impressions I created had a lasting effect on them. To my amazement, I discovered some older people who had never been outside their small suburb of London who looked at me as if I had come from the moon, and when speaking of other cities of the world, they talked about having seen them only on television or heard about them on the radio. Since my first ever journey to London, I strongly felt that this was my once-upon-a-time home. However, there was a lot more to discover. London is one of the world's historically notable cities. The history of this great city goes back more than 2,000 years. It was the center of the British Empire and also home to a wealth of the world's great artists, well-known poets, and scientists. Visiting this great city was like time travel. Think of Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, and the Tower of London. This tower was very significant when considering certain characters in history. However, apart from what I already knew, I discovered how immense in size everything is. London is indeed a very huge and lively city, containing significant institutions, art galleries, shopping centers, museums, and entertainment venues. It is also very welcoming. Taking all that into account, I started making enquiries to discover more about the history of this tantalizing place. First, I pondered that the best place to visit had to be the library, where I started to research the ancient archives. The actual city was originally established around the City of London, and later Westminster was added. It began as the trading post of the Roman Empire in about 43 AD. The city of Westminster started as the residence of English rulers nearly 1,000 years later. These two areas are now based in the center of today's London. The traffic was very noisy when I stayed there, and I believe it still is. Thousands of people crowd the streets, parks, markets, and department stores. In 1666, London was burned, and during World War II, Nazi German air raids destroyed parts of the city, but the English rebuilt it. When the city expanded, taking in surrounding suburbs, it became known as Greater London. The River Thames flows eastward towards its heart and into the sea. I thoroughly enjoyed flying over London with friends in light aircraft. From that height, one could see a lot more of this magical place. When further up a river, the landscape becomes very hilly. About 40 miles east of London, the Thames empties into the North Sea. I discovered that the city was divided into 32 boroughs, in addition to the historic one, and they each had their own councils. However, a single governing body known as the Greater London Council has authority over the whole area. Central London covers almost 10 square miles on both sides of the Great North-South Bend in the Thames, and the most popular areas are based here. Central London is divided into 3 main sections: the City, West End, and South Bank. London Bridge, Tower Bridge, Westminster Bridge, and others link South Bank with the West End and the City. When one travels on a motorbike, one soon discovers the beauty of the oldest part, the walled city of London, which has stood for centuries. The dome of St. Paul's Cathedral towers over the city buildings. One of my favorite edifices is Guildhall, and some parts of this architecture date as far back as the 1400s. According to information, it has been an administrative center for a very long time. The city's Lord Mayor resides in Mansion House, and this tradition dates back to the 1700s. The city is so well planned that the West End boasts a lively retail industry and also a very colorful nightlife. In fact, some religious bodies call it Sin City. The main government buildings are located in southwest London. The Houses of Parliament are one of the best known and tower over the Thames. Number 10 Downing Street is the home of Britain's Prime Minister, which is just off Whitehall, and Buckingham Palace is situated short distance from here. At night, the West End becomes a hub of entertainment with its theatres and cinemas. The main entertainment and shopping district emerge from 2 intersections, one of which is Trafalgar Square. This is an open area with fountains and statues. On Sunday outings with friends visiting the Strand and Whitehall, where streets from the Upper West End meet at this square, has always been like visiting a different world. The intersections where Piccadilly Circus is 6 streets converge. It is no wonder that many of London's finest shops are found here along Oxford, Bond and Regent Streets. I believe Piccadilly is still the largest entertainment district in London. Some parts of the city are better appreciated when visiting the place on foot. London's South Bank is a large cultural centre, and this is where we discover County Hall, which is the headquarters of the Greater London Council. We were told that along the curve of the Thames it has been developing slowly, and the real estate has become very expensive. Interestingly, most of the areas surrounding central London are residential. The heavily built-up area around London progressively opens up to more pleasant and spacious communities. Outside this area is London's green belt, so planned as to limit overcrowding, and beyond this belt one discovers the new towns. Like many Londoners, I would personally like to invest in real estate here. Staying with friends from Redbridge, Havering, and Bexley made me realize that I would feel more at home if I chose to live in Britain. One of my friends, who I met on the university campus, invited me to stay with her for a short while in the Kent area of Bexley. There was a time when I stayed at a hotel in London called the Bloomsbury and found myself in the middle of a fantasy film convention. It was exciting, as this was something I was very passionate about. Downstairs, where refreshments were served, I met some of the main Doctor Who characters. There were feature books as well as comic books to buy, and a number of films were shown. They had a number of key speakers and other professionals, including discussion panels. The whole event was meticulously organized. Discovering such an interest in science fiction made me even more desirous to settle in London. When staying not far from Regent Street, I frequented several newsagents, which not only sold newspapers but all kinds of other books and magazines. One of my favorite newsagents was around Leopold Street. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I bought several Superman comics, some Starlog, and science magazines from them. My friend's grandparents once lived in Wimbledon in a very old-fashioned house where I stayed for a weekend. However, I loved living in Kensington, often visiting the science and natural history museums. One other fascination on my part was the Peter Pan statue in Kensington Gardens. He was the hero of a play by Sir James Barrie. It was about a boy who refused to grow up, and I used to tell my children this story when they were very young. Peter persuaded Wendy, John, and Michael Darling to fly with him and the fairy Tinker Bell to Never Never Land. For a few days I stayed in Camden Town and surroundings with one of my other friends, while always desirous to return to South Bank and even Vauxhall. I was so thankful to my wonderful friends who encouraged me to visit this fantastic city and stay with them. Those friends were the best of the best in understanding people, although some were a little eccentric, following interesting belief systems and spiritualism. It gave me a great chance to get to know some of London's characteristics. It was certainly wonderful to frequent Kensington Gardens, Hyde Park and Regent's Park, where we have enjoyed performances in the open-air theatre. I also remember the black and white photographs which I took in Green Park and St. James Park. An issue which still surprises me is this. Although the city is so huge, many Londoners consider themselves as belonging to certain districts like Soho, Hampstead, or Chelsea, and very rarely to London. When considering that, it might be why these districts have kept their unique characteristics. During my stay, Chelsea was populated with entertainers and artists, whereas Soho was crowded with various nationalities who ran delicatessens and restaurants. Just by walking along the street, one would feel lost, as if somewhere else around the world, as one would hear many other languages. In the East End, Cockneys considered themselves as the real Londoners. To be a true Cockney, you had to be born within the sound of the bells of St. Mary-le-Bow, an historic church. However, I believe most Londoners originated from a line of British-born ancestors. Let us not forget that the city has also attracted many of its residents from outside Great Britain. Many were the children and grandchildren of immigrants. When traveling around the city, I noticed that Soho had more French and Italian ancestry. For some reason, the western part of the city, such as Hammersmith, attracted Australians, Indians, and the Eastern Europeans. The East End had a large Jewish population, but I was told that the wealthy moved to the West End. The religious identities of Londoners were also varied. There were all kinds of churches, from the Church of England to Roman Catholic ones, Jewish synagogues, and even Muslim houses of worship. There are also many other sectarian churches, and a number of kingdom halls in the suburbs. A large number of Londoners live in the outer boroughs. Some well-known ones are far from central London. The more heavily populated residential areas of the city lie in the inner boroughs. London's slums around these sections are in complete contrast to the wealthier areas. Interestingly also, lower-class housing in the inner boroughs are in Westminster and the borough of Kensington, as well as Chelsea, and Westminster covers much of the West End. London has always been Great Britain's main centre for advanced study and research. Admittedly, I felt privileged, having met some genuine friends working in or studying at the University of London, which is Britain's largest university. It has many colleges and medical schools, and a large number of institutes. London has a number of smaller colleges specializing in arts and engineering. Kensington was a good choice to live, as far as I was concerned, for I could easily travel everywhere from there. I was very decisive to continue furthering my education if I remained in London, and wondered if I could also be employed in the education sector. However, one needed to stay there a lot longer to get to know London and Great Britain better. Every corner of this magnificent city offered something different, something useful, something educational and entertaining. As you can tell, I love London and still miss it. When one lives in this city, one easily becomes addicted to it. Can one easily forget one's former nightmares and start a new line of thought, a new way of living, and a brand new dream? You might think that I was attempting something very courageous. Undeniably, I was my happiest in London after the traumatic nightmares I needed to wake up from. After a few months of staying there, something very strange started to happen to me. I was dreaming of my young son, whom I never had a proper opportunity to get to know. Jehovah's Witnesses, through his mother, had all the access to him, and probably so indoctrinated the poor boy that it would be impossible to get to know him any longer. Indeed, what God put together should no man put asunder had to be different with the witnesses. Those dreams kept haunting me until finally, with the encouragement of one of my lady friends, I visited the British Spiritualists group, although I had my doubts. One afternoon we attended a special service there. A psychic medium told me that my family was separated, and some time later, before my growing old, my children would come back to me. This surprised me, and yet, as I said before, I could no longer believe in anything. I became forever critical. I said nothing to my friend, but it awakened an interest in me to conduct research into this field and see why people believed in such matters. I was cognizant about these issues, and that there were so many people wanting to believe in things which could not be proven. There were too many myths to contend with. I also had most unusual and not fully explainable experiences to consider. Over the years, I have met a large number of spiritually inclined people capable of guessing reasonably correctly what a near-future event could be. Others were capable of knowing about people's loved ones who have been dead for a long time, bringing comforting news about them. Some sounded very genuine, but others were doing it purely to earn some money. It certainly made me very curious, and I felt the need to experiment and see if I could do it also. I had previously experimented with matters relating to altered consciousness and hypnosis. Some of the psychics I encountered claimed to channel to higher intelligences, even to extragalactic people, under trance, but I wanted to see tangible evidence about their authenticity without being overly critical. I contemplated how my ex-wife would consider me if she knew what I wanted to experiment with. Probably in utter fear of sinning against the spirit, and yet the only book she preferred to read was full of those psychic endeavors, while that same literature had tendencies to condemn everything of that nature. Maybe I was subjected to erroneous interpretations of the scriptures and did not realize it at the time. Fanatical sectarian Christian groups, taking that book literally, do the same. I was fascinated with people who claimed they could utilize psychic energies and move physical objects or take psychic photographs, where others apparently from different dimensions would make themselves visible. I started taking pictures of people and places more often, analyzing them under a microscope, but I discovered nothing psychically explainable for a very long time. That was until I decided to look at my old photograph albums. I was beginning to see what I thought were imaginary images of other people. It was similar to looking at clouds and seeing ever-changing shapes of things, animals, and people. When I was a child, I often used to watch them with my brother. My mother read coffee grounds and tea leaves for friends for the fun of it, but she did not take it very seriously. She was able to see images in those cups and interpret them, and if it provided some comfort for people, or they were entertained by it, she was happy. There were a few Jehovah's Witnesses who considered it as a practice of witchcraft and talked against my mother as if she was a great sinner, according to their supposed Bible teachings. My mother was a very honest and loving person who never wanted to hurt anybody and sacrificed a lot of things in order to make our lives happy. I found those accusations against her very distasteful and hard to take. Frankly, there are so many unknowns about physical life and the brain. I believe that we can discover a lot more about ourselves if we are prepared to research into our minds without bias and prejudice. I was going to study certain aspects of human characteristics and trends which are completely hidden from sight. For example, why did people claim they could see other beings when the majority of us could not? Was it only in their imagination, or were they hallucinating under the influence of habit-forming drugs or alcohol? Some people claimed to see and encounter extraterrestrials, like I had. If I could go along with my own experiences, which were very real to me, what others claimed might be equally real to them. It was probably expressed within their own truth, as they believed, and it was, therefore, far better not to criticize, but rather study the nature of their claims. I always prefer to put my personal experiences to the test and see if they could be reproduced under the conditions in which they occurred in the first instance. However, some experiences, like the spirit images of people and places I captured on film without using cameras, could not be reproduced, no matter how hard I tried. I remember Zig Ziglar's wise words. Of all the attitudes we can acquire, surely the attitude of gratitude is the most important and by far most life-changing. In fact, my returning to London helped me wonderfully to overcome some of my personal problems. Indeed, I had forgiven those real evildoers who were separating families because either husbands or wives have moved out of their so-called truths, living a worldly life in a world their Creator had apparently so loved, according to their teachings, and gave His only begotten Son. Interestingly, however, they keep repeating that they do not encourage the married couples to separate. I still have great hope that they will one day soon be able to learn the real truth. When I was very young and in my late teens, the witness friends continually opposed my willingness to educate myself, later encouraging me not to be involved with the opposite sex or get married, believing that the end was extremely close. As in 1975, they discouraged others in their midst from starting anything beneficial in their lives. When the overseer of their congregation suggested that I should read 1 Timothy 4, verses 1 to 3, I wondered how many times he had read it before, and how he interpreted. It says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the later times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of the devils, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them, which believe and know the truth." A friend asked me only recently if I had forgiven my ex-wife for everything she has done, knowingly or unknowingly. But was there anything to forgive? We are told that God forgives. We are also told that love, which is one of the attributes of God, is forgiving. One can therefore conclude that unforgiveness is from the evil, not from God. However, as far as I am concerned, anybody who cannot forgive may be somebody who has not been able to think for oneself or be permitted to live independently due to religious intolerance. Magda's so-called beloved brothers and sisters must certainly have controlled her every move, in the process rendering her vulnerable and dependent on them. As I understood, she could only function within a very limited framework based upon Jehovah's Witness principles, where the world is considered as being ruled over by Satan the devil. The only way to have everlasting life in that world after Armageddon, according to their interpretation of the Bible, is through absolute dedication to their organization without question. I cannot forget how they used every conceivable opportunity to judge and paint me as greatly unfaithful, a liar, a cheat, and a fornicator, with a harlot of the world, to justify their cultist viewpoints and decision to disfellowship me. I was not the only one treated this way. There are a vast number of others condemned to eternal hellfire, like myself. The witnesses are either blind to the facts or completely incapable of understanding what harm they caused to others in the name of a supreme God under the umbrella of righteousness. I can only hope that they will start to understand what true righteousness is, not just by reading from the Bible in parrot fashion without really understanding. One hopes that they truly have the love of God in their hearts as they passionately preach. When we were finally divorced, I told Magda that one such experience was enough for a lifetime, and I would probably never again attempt to get married, and if by any chance we met, we would have grown frail and gray, and that if she had any love remaining in her heart and began to understand the situation, it would be too late to rekindle the old flames we may have once dreamt of. She showed no reaction. It might have been due to my outlandish language from another planet which she could not comprehend. However, forgiveness does not signify weakness, and it does not declare any admission of vulnerability or feeling guilty for one's past nightmares. Therefore, it is important to make a firm decision to forgive whatever the hurt was and bury it. In other words, deciding that those past nightmares, blaming, condemnations, and misunderstandings will never bother us any longer. We need to feel free so that we can go ahead and advance in our undertakings. Furthermore, what else could I do other than forgive her, as well as my daughters, for they did not know what they were doing? No matter what they may invent and claim about me, who they treated like an absolute nothing, they were completely blinded by their allegedly truth-loving mother under the umbrella of the cult she belonged to. Besides, I never believe in dwelling on past mistakes forever, because it never takes us anywhere. Both my daughters have been very naive and mentally very young when they completely abandoned me, leaving their mother and her faithful friends to feel triumphant. Their hateful and angry world certainly included almost all man-made belief systems wherein their mother was sucked in. In reality, I really believe that they loved and trusted her more, following the mother knows best principle. I am certainly not going to oppose them with their decision to be whatever they chose. Perhaps they needed to wait until they could understand that their mother was never really free. She was certainly not herself, as anybody with some intellect would understand, for her entire personality was sadly stolen away and replaced with a cultist model where she sought divine wisdom and happiness, believing in only those scriptures as interpreted by her so-called brothers. I sincerely hope that she has found what she sought. But with a brain completely drained of common sense and a questioning mind, one would only be able to think within the framework of those who believed themselves being so righteous whilst groping in total darkness. It is a state they themselves could not comprehend, thus condemning everything in the world. Praise ye the Lord, and everything will be given unto thee. Alas, it does not happen that way. My daughters had the added disadvantage of trying to learn everything from their all-knowing school friends, wherein their parents were seen as unwanted hindrances to their supposed progression. However, when fools lead the other fools, they can only create a world of fools, groping in complete ignorance. I knew that my daughters considered me as the evil man, thanks to the grandparents on their mother's side, as I was not a member of the perfect race, and also thanks to their mother's faithful friends, who were ever ready to destroy the unfaithful as they judged them. All disfellowshipped were allegedly evil, believing it was Jehovah's decision and judgment. After being told something of this nature, I could not accept any falsehood in regard to the existence of such a cruel deity they worshipped. However, since they claim to know the Bible truths, perhaps they should revisit Romans chapter 14, verse 13, where it clearly states, "Let us not therefore judge one another any more, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way." One of my daughters had a further handicap, for otherwise what kind of child would attempt to harm her father just because he had not allowed her to have her way with those boyfriends, let her take drugs, and not allow her to eat only McDonald's food, and make her work like a slave for 2 weeks as a school assignment? It therefore seemed she had every reason to destroy him. Although she was resentful towards her mother, who chose the Jehovah's Witness faith over her family, my daughter was completely drilled by her about the wicked world I belonged to, for not being faithful to what she believed in, thus following every dictate issued forth from her mother precisely. I am unable to forget everything I was subjected to, no matter how hard I try. My only consolation was the hope that she would grow out of it when she matured. I was certain of the validity of my claims in this regard, because it was impossible to dismiss what one observed when Annette was with her mother. During my most vulnerable times, emotionally devastated and suffering from an unexpected hernia, duodenal ulcer, and inflamed urinary tract, needing several medical treatments, I cannot forget what my wonderful daughter told me in front of her sister Birgit. That was the icing on the cake. Her attitude really stunned me as she continued, Dad, I can have you put behind bars. Do you know how? You will see." I was puzzled, asking myself, is this what I deserved? I knew she was leading a very loose and sexually active life, according to a number of her friends, neighbors, and teachers, but I was not meant to know. Was that because she wanted to sleep with her 3 boyfriends and had invited them in before my arrival home from work? I cannot forget how I was almost stopped by those boys from entering my own home. She told me exactly as I remember, "Why did you have to come home now, Dad?" As I briefly mentioned, I ignored it and told the boys to pack up and go. Apprehensively they left, but I could not ignore how angry Annette was, not talking to me for days. I remember how she was begging me to go and sleep at Regis' place just for tonight. When the boys left, she told me if I asked them, they could kill you. You are a fucking bastard. Did you see how strong they were? They are muscle-bound, you know? Alas, I can never forget this chilly episode. Yes, even this I have forgiven, because people are bound to make mistakes. I might sound like I am repeating myself, but simply sweeping things under the carpet is something I could not do, and there are things one cannot easily forget. On the other hand, I have always been friendly with people, even if I did not know them well, and some were really kind. I met some of them at the VSU, who invited my daughter Annette and me to their home in the country Victoria when she was still very young. begging me to stay there a little longer. I have told you about this story. Here is a little further analysis of this unwanted memory. It seemed that they had already decided for me, suggesting that I could leave Annette there. After lengthy forensic research, the child was found at her mother's. This scenario was engineered to paint me as an irresponsible, incapable parent. In this analysis, it is clearly evident that the situation could only have been orchestrated by a real evil force. When we were invited to have one more court hearing, Annette was not comparable to her former self. She did not smile and was not excited seeing me after such a drastic separation. She was like an emotionless robot, and I was very certain that she was under some form of hypnotic trance. That must have made her mother exceedingly happy, believing that her prayers were answered. It was impossible to dismiss when looking at Magda's face. One thing I have been so absolutely certain of was that the cult those people belonged to, pretending to be friends in the first place, were widely using hypnosis, as they previously mentioned, declaring that it was for the greatest good. I am not accusing anyone by this statement, only making my own observations. I can never forget Magda's words when she said, "My God Jehovah heard my prayers." I know these following words may be classified as harsh, but they need to be said nevertheless. Could Jehovah be a mask used by the devil? But after the court decided to return the child back to her father, I'm sure that those witnesses must have felt distraught, just like Magda, their beloved sister, did. Annette's behavior towards me has never been idealistic following that wretched situation. She was extremely argumentative about everything, and it was so reminiscent of her dear mother's behavior. Psalm 62, verse 9 declares, "Surely men of low degree are vanity, and men of high degree are a lie. To be laid in the balance, they are altogether lighter than vanity." She was trying to instruct me about everything, endeavoring to give me orders about how I should live my life, and blaming me for every conceivable situation. I kept quiet, as if nothing happened, and this new condition continued for a considerable length of time. Even this I have forgiven. However, I did not desire to provide any reason to be condemned for doing wrong either. I could not stop her or anybody else if they decided to think of me as bad, for I had to be the evil man. However, I had my principles and responsibilities as a parent. I knew I had been blamed by the witnesses, and particularly by Magda, as an extremely bad parent, for I was not in their truth. Anybody who was an intellectual and academic was not to their liking. I had no choice but also forgive Birgit, who left after leaving a torn piece of paper on which she scribbled, "You can live with our memories." Obviously, she did not realize how much she hurt me. All I could say was, "Thanks for the memories." Later, I was to discover that when Annette went to her mother's, her very first action was to attack her with a pair of scissors. Since they could only see me as the evil on advice from the witnesses, I am certain that they took Annette's ungainly behavior as being my responsibility. Did they know by any chance that I was completely against all kinds of violence and hatred? Yet after accusing me with an unthinkable and shocking situation, as previously mentioned, with some reservation and exceeding sadness, I realized how Annette wanted to punish me and even completely destroy me. I was extremely shocked and surprised when I discovered her in my bedroom, where she was never invited. Years later, I learned that she was paying large sums of money to her friends or male clients to bash me up and spill my brains on the roadside. Birgit was seemingly begging her not to do something like that. What Jehovah's Witnesses have done through my ex-wife and her daughters under her strict disciplines against me has never been anything other than the pure evil. Now she can behave as if she is one of the most righteous women in the world, being praised by her current family of Jehovah's Witnesses in their weekly gatherings. I regret being where I was, when and who I was during those times of devastation. Repeating myself, I am sorry for having had the custody of my daughters. In all honesty, I regretted having become their father. Maybe I should have left her precious daughters to her to be looked after in her elders' special care.